Dahbia Benkired, she killed Lola Daviet. It was a quiet Friday evening in Paris, until the scream. Police officers, their flashlights trembling, opened a plastic storage box near an apartment complex. Inside, lay the lifeless body of a 12-year-old girl. Her name was Lola Daviet. The neighbors watched from their windows in disbelief. Moments earlier, security cameras had captured a woman, calm, collected, even smiling, rolling that same box into the building courtyard. That woman's name? Dahbia Benkired. But what could drive someone to commit something so unthinkable? Was it rage? Jealousy? Madness? And how did a seemingly ordinary woman cross paths with an innocent schoolgirl, only for their meeting to end in horror? Stay tuned, because this story isn't just shocking. It's unreal. The girl in the courtyard. It all started in October 2022, in the calm neighborhood of the 19th arrondissement of Paris. The Daviet family was well known in the building, kind, friendly, and loved by many. Their daughter, Lola, was bright, polite, and full of life. Every day after school, she would come home smiling, carrying her little backpack. But that Friday, she never made it upstairs. That morning, Lola had gone to school like any other day. Her parents, both school caretakers, waved goodbye to her as she left. Her father, Johann Daviet, stayed behind to continue his shift at the same building they lived in. Unknown to him, a stranger had already entered their world, a 24-year-old woman named Dahbia Benkired, who was temporarily staying with another tenant in the same block. She didn't have a job, often wandered around aimlessly, and was known for acting a little off. No one thought she was dangerous. Until that day. Around 3 p.m., school ended, and Lola walked home alone as usual. She was captured on CCTV at the building entrance, chatting briefly with Dahbia, who was standing near the door. They seemed calm, casual even. Minutes later, both disappeared inside. That was the last time anyone saw Lola alive. When evening came, and Lola didn't return, her parents began to panic. They called her friends, the school, and finally the police. By nightfall, the entire neighborhood was out searching, calling her name, checking every corner. But as the night dragged on, one neighbor reported something strange. A woman dragging a large suitcase down the stairs, struggling, muttering to herself. The suitcase looked heavy. Too heavy. That woman was Dahbia. And what was inside that suitcase would soon send shockwaves across France. The box of secrets. When police arrived at the apartment building, the air was thick with fear. Neighbors whispered in groups, parents held their kids tighter, and flashing blue lights painted the walls of the courtyard. At first, the search seemed hopeless. Lola was nowhere to be found. But then, an officer noticed something unusual behind the building, an abandoned plastic storage box, taped shut. It looked like trash at first. But the officer felt something was wrong. He peeled off the tape, and what they found inside would change everything. Inside the box was Lola's lifeless body, hidden in a blanket. The world stopped. Even the toughest officers turned pale. But one question echoed through everyone's mind: who could do this to a child? That's when the CCTV footage came in. It showed a young woman with long dark hair dragging the same box into the courtyard earlier that day. She was calm, almost emotionless, as if she had done nothing wrong. Her name soon came up in the investigation: Dahbia Benkired. She was arrested that very night. At first, Dahbia acted confused. She told officers different stories, each one more bizarre than the last. In one version, she said Lola helped her carry the box. In another, she claimed she had nothing to do with it at all. But when police searched the apartment where Dahbia had been staying, they found evidence that made their blood run cold: Lola's fingerprints, Dahbia's clothes stained with blood, and a knife. Something horrifying had happened inside those walls. Investigators pieced together the timeline. They believed Dahbia lured Lola into the apartment, perhaps under the pretense of helping with something small. But what happened next, no one could understand. During questioning, Dahbia's words grew darker. She mumbled about revenge, voices in her head, and people who had wronged her. Her emotions flipped between laughter and rage. At one point, she even smiled while describing the events of that day, sending chills down the spines of everyone in the room. It became clear this wasn't a normal crime. This was a descent into madness. The media exploded with headlines. How could this happen? Who is Dahbia Benkired? Justice for Lola. As the city mourned, detectives knew they had to dig deeper into Dahbia's past. Who was she before all this? And what drove her to take the life of a 12-year-old girl who had done nothing to her? Just when they thought they had seen it all, a shocking confession came that changed the entire direction of the case. The confession. Inside the cold gray walls of the police station, the only sound was the ticking of the clock. It was past midnight. Dahbia Benkired sat across from two detectives, her hands cuffed, eyes empty, lips trembling, but not from fear. From something else. She leaned back in her chair and said softly, "You want to know why I did it, don't you?" The detectives exchanged glances. They didn't speak. They just waited. Then, Dahbia began to talk. Her story was strange, twisted, and full of contradictions. She claimed she had been angry, not at Lola, but at Lola's mother. According to Dahbia, she believed the girl's mother had disrespected her earlier in the week when she refused to help her with something small. That single moment, she said, lit a fire inside her. But her words didn't make sense. She spoke about spirits, revenge, and voices telling her what to do. At one point, she laughed, saying that Lola was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then she started crying, whispering that she didn't mean for it to go that far. The detectives couldn't tell what was real and what was delusion. Was she pretending to be unstable? Or was she truly lost in her own world? Still, the details she gave matched the evidence found in the apartment. She described the clothes Lola wore, the time she brought her upstairs, and even the items inside the box. The truth was undeniable: Dahbia had killed her. When asked why she hid the body in a box, she said something that made everyone shiver. "I didn't want her to leave me yet." That single sentence turned the investigation into something even darker. Psychologists were called in to assess her mental state. Some believed Dahbia was suffering from deep psychological illness. Others thought she was simply evil, cold, calculated, and seeking attention. But there was more. As investigators dug into her past, they found she had a long history of instability. She was born in Algeria, had moved to France years earlier, and had bounced between jobs and shelters. Her life was filled with rejection, loneliness, and anger. She often told people the world was against her. But nothing in her past could justify what she did to a child. Meanwhile, outside the police station, the story gripped the entire country. Candlelight vigils were held for Lola. Her name trended across social media with the words #JusticeForLola. People demanded answers. How could someone like Dahbia, homeless, unstable, and clearly struggling, slip through the cracks until it was too late? As the days passed, Dahbia's confession became public, and the outrage grew louder. She was transferred to a psychiatric facility for evaluation, her face expressionless as she was escorted out in handcuffs. But the case was far from over. Because in the middle of her confused ramblings, Dahbia mentioned someone else, a person she claimed had helped her that day. Police weren't sure if it was real or another one of her hallucinations. But when they checked the building's cameras again, they saw a second figure in the hallway, just minutes before Dahbia led Lola inside. Who was that person? And what did they really know about what happened behind that apartment door? The second figure. The next morning, detectives crowded around the flickering CCTV screen. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to see movement. At 3:12 p.m., just before Dahbia led Lola upstairs, a shadow appeared in the hallway, another person. A tall figure in a hoodie. The face wasn't clear. But one thing was certain: Dahbia wasn't alone. The discovery sent a chill through the investigation team. Had she been lying about everything, or was someone else truly involved? Detectives began combing through the footage, frame by frame. At first, they thought it might be another tenant. But then, something strange stood out: the figure didn't enter or exit the building through the front door. It appeared suddenly, and vanished minutes later. When investigators confronted Dahbia with the footage, she stared at the screen in silence. Then, she smiled faintly. "You finally saw him," she whispered. The room went cold. "Who is he?" one detective asked. Dahbia looked away. "He tells me what to do," she said softly. "He's always there when people make me angry." The detectives realized she wasn't talking about a real person. She was describing the voice in her head, the same one she had mentioned in earlier interrogations. But what made it terrifying was the way she spoke about it, like it was real. Like it was standing right there in the room with her. Psychologists confirmed what the police had feared: Dahbia was suffering from severe mental instability. She was living in a world mixed between reality and delusion. But even if she was unstable, she had still committed a horrific crime. Meanwhile, forensic teams continued to gather evidence. They reconstructed the sequence of events inside the apartment that day. From what they found, the timeline was chillingly short, less than 2 hours from the moment Lola entered the building to when Dahbia was seen dragging the box. In those 2 hours, a young girl's life had been stolen. When the medical report came back, the details were so painful that officers refused to share them publicly. But one thing was clear: Lola had suffered, and the crime had been deliberate. Across France, grief turned into anger. Protests filled the streets of Paris. People demanded justice, shouting that the system had failed to protect a child. Lola's parents, standing together outside the courthouse, could barely speak through their tears. Through it all, Dahbia sat in her cell, quiet and expressionless. Some days, she refused to eat. Other days, she spoke to herself, laughing softly at things only she could hear. But one night, during a routine cell check, a guard overheard her whispering something chilling under her breath. He said, "It's not over, there's more to do." Those words reopened fears among investigators. Was it just another sign of her delusion? Or was there something, or someone, she was still protecting? The police decided to trace everyone who had contact with her before the murder. Friends, neighbors, even strangers she'd met in shelters. And that's when they found something unexpected. A message exchange on her phone, with someone who had disappeared right after the crime. A person who might have known exactly what Dahbia planned to do. The vanished contact. The air inside the investigation unit was heavy. Detectives huddled around a single phone screen, the phone Dahbia had been carrying on the day of the murder. Most of her messages were nonsense, full of strange phrases and emotional rants. But buried between them, one chat stood out. A contact saved under a single letter, M. The conversation began days before the murder. At first, it seemed harmless, just small talk. But as the messages continued, they grew darker. M. kept asking Dahbia about her problems with the people in her building, telling her, "You need to make them respect you." In one chilling message, sent just 24 hours before Lola's death, M. wrote, "You know what you have to do. Don't let them walk over you again." Detectives immediately traced the number. But there was a problem, the SIM card had been deactivated right after the crime. Whoever M. was, they had vanished. The police widened their search, contacting the phone company, pulling tower data, and checking Dahbia's social media. Slowly, a profile began to emerge. M. was linked to several online accounts that had been messaging Dahbia for months, always feeding her paranoia, always pushing her anger. The question was M. a real person manipulating her? Or just another identity Dahbia had created during her mental breakdown? When investigators brought this up in interrogation, Dahbia looked up, her eyes wide. "M is my friend," she said. "He understands me. He told me I was chosen." Her voice trembled, and her hands shook. "He said they were laughing at me. He said the girl had to pay." The detectives fell silent. They were listening to a woman who had completely lost her grip on reality, yet every word she spoke revealed more of the nightmare inside her mind. Meanwhile, forensic experts confirmed that all the messages came from the same phone, but they couldn't prove whether Dahbia had been texting herself or not. Still, the timing of each message matched moments of her emotional breakdowns before the murder. It was as if M. was the echo of her rage, the voice in her head given life through her phone. Outside, the story consumed the country. News outlets called it the madness behind the murder. Some people wanted her locked away forever. Others demanded she be placed in a psychiatric hospital. But one person's life would never be the same again, Lola's father, Lola Daviet. He had discovered the horrifying truth only hours after the body was found. In one heartbreaking interview, his voice cracked as he said, "I was just downstairs, and she was only a few feet above me." His words tore through the nation. It wasn't just about the crime, it was about how easily it happened, how quickly innocence was destroyed. While Dahbia sat in her isolated cell, investigators prepared for the final psychological evaluation that would decide her fate. Was she criminally responsible, or truly insane? But before the test could even begin, something unexpected happened. One morning, a guard doing his rounds stopped in front of Dahbia's door. She was sitting on the floor, whispering into her palms as if holding an invisible phone. He heard her say, "Yes, M. I know what comes next." The guard froze. Because when he looked closer, there was no phone in her hands. Inside the mind of Dahbia Benkired. A cold wind swept across Paris as the van pulled up to La Santé prison hospital. Inside sat Dahbia Benkired, her wrists cuffed, her eyes staring blankly out the window. She was being taken for her final psychiatric evaluation, the test that would determine whether she would spend her life behind bars or inside a mental institution. The doctors waiting for her were some of France's best forensic psychologists. They had read every page of the case file, every report, every confession, every recording. Still, none of them were prepared for what they were about to witness. In the quiet of the interview room, Dr. Lefebvre sat across from Dahbia. He began gently, asking her simple questions. Her answers were distant, fragmented. "Do you understand why you're here, Dahbia?" "Because they say I hurt the little girl," she whispered. "Did you?" "He told me to." M said she had to be punished. Her tone was calm, almost peaceful. It wasn't the voice of someone filled with guilt or fear. It was the voice of someone who believed every word she said. Dr. Lefebvre leaned in. "Who is M?" "He's the one who talks to me when people are cruel," she said. "He tells me what to do. He protects me." Then her expression changed, her lips curled into a faint smile. He was proud of me that day. The room went silent. Even the doctor, who had heard countless confessions from violent offenders, felt his heart race. Over the next few days, Dahbia underwent multiple psychological tests. Her responses painted a disturbing picture. She suffered from severe psychosis, delusions, and paranoid schizophrenia. In her mind, Lola wasn't just a child, she had become a symbol, someone sent to mock her. She truly believed she was carrying out justice, a twisted form of revenge fueled by voices that only she could hear. The doctors wrote in their report. The subject displays extreme detachment from reality. She does not understand the moral weight of her actions. She perceives them as instructions from an external entity. But even with that conclusion, the question of accountability divided the country. Should she be treated as a mentally ill woman, or a murderer who must face punishment like anyone else? Meanwhile, Lola's parents sat quietly in court during the preliminary hearings. Each time Dahbia entered, they couldn't bear to look at her. The grief was still raw, their faces drained of life. When asked if they believed Dahbia was insane, Lola's father simply said, "I don't care if she's sick or not. My daughter is gone." The courtroom fell silent. As the trial date drew near, journalists filled the streets outside, cameras flashing, voices echoing. Everyone wanted to know, what really happened inside Dahbia's mind that day? Was it pure evil, or a complete collapse of reality? Then, just a week before her court appearance, Dahbia made a new statement that shocked even her lawyers. During a late-night check, she told a nurse something chilling. "M isn't gone. He said there's someone else who needs to pay." The nurse froze. "Who, Dahbia?" She leaned in close and whispered. "Her mother." That single word sent alarm bells ringing. Prison authorities increased security immediately, fearing she might harm herself, or worse, try to target others. It was becoming clear, even behind locked doors, Dahbia's madness was still alive. But when psychologists tried to confront her about that statement the next morning, they found something strange. She didn't remember saying any of it. Instead, she just stared at them with that same blank expression and said, "M doesn't talk when you're here." And then she smiled. The trial of Dahbia Benkired. The courthouse in Paris was overflowing. Reporters, photographers, and angry citizens lined the streets. Everyone wanted to see the woman at the center of one of France's most disturbing crimes, Dahbia Benkired. It had been months since the murder of 12-year-old Lola Daviet, but the pain still felt fresh. Posters with Lola's smiling face fluttered in the cold October air. Beneath them, candles and flowers covered the steps, a reminder of the innocence lost. Inside, the courtroom was tense. Lola's parents sat quietly in the front row, their eyes fixed on the floor. When the guards brought Dahbia in, the room fell silent. She looked thin, pale, and strangely calm. Her wrists trembled slightly as she sat down. Then, the judge entered. The prosecution began by laying out the evidence. The CCTV footage, the DNA matches, the confessions, and the psychiatric reports. Every detail painted the same picture: Dahbia was responsible. But the defense argued something different. They said she wasn't in control of her mind. They said the voices she heard, the mysterious M, had pushed her to do it. That she was more patient than predator. As the witnesses took the stand, the truth behind Dahbia's unstable world began to unfold. A neighbor testified seeing her days before the murder, wandering barefoot in the hallway, muttering to herself. Another said she had once knocked on their door at midnight, claiming someone was after her. And then came the friend who had let Dahbia stay in her apartment, the same apartment where the murder happened. She broke down in tears as she described how Dahbia's moods changed like a switch. 1 minute gentle, the next terrifying. She said everyone was laughing at her, the friend sobbed. "I tried to tell her it wasn't true. I never thought she'd hurt anyone." Then it was Lola's father's turn to testify. As he stood before the court, his voice cracked. "I saw her that morning," he said softly. "I was fixing a light downstairs. I didn't know, my daughter was upstairs, with her." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the judge looked away for a moment. When it was time for Dahbia to speak, the room fell completely still. The guards stood closer. Everyone waited. She looked around slowly, then said, "I didn't want to hurt her. But M told me she was part of the game." Her tone was flat. No emotion. No regret. Only confusion and a strange sort of conviction. "They think I'm crazy," she continued, "but I'm not. They don't see what I see." Her lawyer tried to stop her, whispering for her to be quiet, but she kept talking. "He told me if I did it, they would finally leave me alone." Gasps filled the courtroom. Lola's mother turned away, her face buried in her hands. The doctors were called next. Their report confirmed what many already suspected. Dahbia suffered from severe mental illness. One doctor testified, "She lives in a world she cannot control. Her delusions guide her actions. She truly believes the voice of M is real. But the prosecution fought back hard. She knew what she was doing, the prosecutor argued. She cleaned the scene. She hid the body. That's not madness. That's guilt. The debate divided the courtroom. Was she sick or sinister? For 2 weeks, the trial continued. Every detail, every image, every testimony tore deeper into the wound of what had happened. And then, after hours of deliberation, the judge finally called for silence. Everyone stood. Even Dahbia looked up, her eyes blank. The judge spoke slowly. After careful review of all evidence and psychiatric evaluations, the court finds that the accused, Dahbia Benkired, is not criminally responsible for her actions at the time of the crime, due to severe mental illness. Gasps filled the room. Lola's mother collapsed into her husband's arms. The verdict meant Dahbia would not go to prison. Instead, she would be committed to a secure psychiatric facility for life. Outside, the crowd erupted in anger. Some shouted for justice. Others wept quietly, holding pictures of Lola. And as the police escorted Dahbia out of the courthouse, one reporter shouted through the chaos. "Do you regret what you did, Dahbia?" She turned slightly, her lips curling into a faint smile. "M said it's over now," she whispered. Then she looked up at the sky and began to hum, softly, almost like a lullaby. No one could tell whether it was grief or madness. Aftermath of the madness. Weeks passed after the verdict, but the pain in France didn't fade. The name Lola Daviet still echoed across television screens, newspapers, and online discussions. People lit candles outside schools. They left flowers under streetlights. Everywhere, her face, smiling, innocent, frozen in time, reminded everyone of the horror that had stolen her future. But inside the secure psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of Paris, Dahbia Benkired's world was far from silent. She spent her days in a small, padded room, white walls, no mirrors, no windows that opened. Guards watched her through a small square glass pane. She spoke to no one for hours. Sometimes, she just sat cross-legged on the floor, whispering to herself. Other times, she screamed into the empty air, accusing invisible figures of laughing at her. The nurses grew used to her outbursts. But what frightened them most were the quiet moments. Because that's when she'd begin to smile, the same faint smile she'd shown during the trial. One nurse said she often heard Dahbia whispering late at night. "M is gone, but someone new is coming." They wrote it down in her file but didn't understand what she meant. To them, it was just another hallucination, another ghost in her broken mind. Meanwhile, in the real world, Lola's parents tried to rebuild their lives. They couldn't go back to the apartment building where everything happened. They moved to another part of Paris, away from the cameras and constant reminders. But their grief turned into determination. They began speaking publicly, not about revenge, but about reform. They wanted change. They wanted France to fix the system that allowed someone like Dahbia, who had shown clear signs of mental instability, to roam free. A movement began, Justice pour Lola, Justice for Lola. It spread fast. Parents, teachers, and citizens came together, demanding tighter supervision of mentally unstable individuals and stronger child protection laws. The tragedy that had once broken them was now giving others the strength to act. Still, no reform could fill the emptiness in their hearts. Lola's room at home remained untouched, her school bag still by the door, her drawings still pinned to the wall. Her mother once told a reporter, "We don't want people to forget her. We just want them to learn from what happened." Back inside the psychiatric hospital, months passed. Dahbia's behavior seemed to calm. Doctors said she was responding to medication. She ate her meals. She followed orders. She even began talking to her therapists again. But one day, during a routine session, she looked up at her doctor and asked quietly, "Do you think people still remember me?" The doctor hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Some do," he said softly. Dahbia smiled faintly. "Good," she whispered. "Because he said they would." The doctor frowned. "Who said that, Dahbia?" She looked up with a blank stare and replied, "M." The doctor's pen froze midair. Even after all the medication, all the therapy, all the months in isolation, the voice was still there. Outside the walls of that hospital, Paris tried to move on. Life returned to normal, at least on the surface. But for those who knew the story, the scars would never fully heal. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, people gather quietly in the courtyard where Lola's life ended. They hold candles, whisper prayers, and remind the world what was lost. And as the lights flicker against the night sky, one thing becomes painfully clear. This story isn't just about madness. It's about the fragile line between sanity and evil, and how one moment, one broken mind, can destroy countless lives. Beyond the myths, into the sorrow. The story of Lola Daviet and Dahbia Benkired is not just another crime headline. It is a wound, deep, raw, and unforgettable. Because at its heart, it is the story of two broken worlds colliding. One, a young girl filled with light and dreams. The other, a woman trapped inside the darkness of her own mind. And when those worlds met, tragedy was born. For the people of France, this case wasn't only about guilt or insanity, it was about how society fails to see the signs before it's too late. A woman who had cried out for help. A system that didn't listen. And a child who paid the price for it all. Even now, years later, her name, Lola, still brings tears to the eyes of those who remember her. Her parents, still standing strong, turned their pain into a movement for change. Their message was simple. No family should ever have to go through this again. Through their grief, they gave Lola's story purpose. As for Dahbia Benkired, she remains locked away in the silence of her own mind. Some say she spends her days staring at the wall, whispering to voices no one else can hear. Others say she no longer remembers what she did. Maybe that's the cruelest part of all. That she might never truly understand the horror she unleashed. In the end, this tragedy forces us to face a haunting truth. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it hides behind sadness. Behind madness. Behind a face that seems just human. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Because when the line between madness and murder disappears, when a society ignores those slipping through its cracks, what happened to Lola can happen again. Her story is a warning, a reminder that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about prevention, compassion, and vigilance. And as the candles burn each year in her memory, their light cuts through the darkness, a silent promise whispered into the Paris night. You will never be forgotten, Lola.